In this episode,
this physical manipulation is going to get this person's physical body, and more importantly, their nervous system, to a better state of balance, better state of function. So now they have the energy, subconsciously really, to start letting these things in. You need to take into account the patient's body, their mind, and their spirit, see where we can help activate these healing forces. And you need to really support that body's ability to heal. And if you do all three of those things, that's a rational treatment. If you miss any of those three things, it's irrational. And that's where most medical and even a lot of alternative treatments fall short. You don't need to necessarily even believe in osteopathy for it to work. A lot of people say, oh, do I need to believe this works? No, it doesn't matter. I'm moving tissues, I'm helping blood flow, I'm helping neurologic function. People start to feel it. And so you're always just moving people to a greater state of function.
In a way, biology is trying to explain with newer technology what many people have practiced for thousands of years that worked. Now science is trying to understand it. Why does it work, right? Hello and welcome to Health in Focus with Jacobus. I am your host, Jacobus Hollowijn. This is a program about health, healing, and healthy lifestyles. It's not the idea that we diagnose, treat, or cure. The purpose of the show is to inform, entertain, and educate. Today, my guest is an osteopathic physician, Dr. Sunil Bhat. And the topic of osteopathy is confusing to many. People think, is it a doctor? Is it not a doctor? So we're going to learn a lot about that today. And I really appreciate you tuning in today. I hope you take some notes and that you do more research yourself if this topic interests you. Dr. Sunil Bhat, his friends call him Sunny, is an osteopathic physician. He practices traditional osteopathy. He's board certified in osteopathic family medicine and also board certified in osteopathic neuromuscular skeletal medicine. He practices in Bozeman, Montana at Big Sky Osteopathy, and that's also his website, bigskyosteopathy.com. Dr. Bhat, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. This is an interesting journey because a little bit from what I learned from you is that you did not, right out of high school, said, I'm going to go to medical school and I'm going to be an osteopath. How does a journey like that in your case go?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And you know, what I've found through my journey into osteopathy is a lot of the people who end up being traditional osteopaths, like I am, have a similar journey. It's all unique, but most of them don't want to be doctors to begin with. They try something else to begin with. And my father was a physician. He's a urologist, so he's a surgeon, trained in India, practiced, did his residency and fellowship in New York City. And, you know, I saw that world. I thought it was a great world, but it wasn't for me. You know, even in high school and college, I didn't really care to be a physician, a medical doctor, I should say. I saw, you know, a lot of it was just, I saw how the system worked. I saw the drug reps coming in and educating the doctors on the products, and it didn't resonate too well with me. So I actually decided to do bioengineering. And the reason I picked biomedical engineering was when I was in high school, I really liked biology. I really liked physics. And I wanted to understand more about biology and physics, and I thought that's what bioengineering was. I was a little bit mistaken because as I started undergraduate at Boston University doing the biomedical engineering.
Boston University,
yep. They did, you know, you learn the biology, you learn the organic chemistry, all that stuff. But the mentality in the engineering school was, how do we change this? And my mentality,
how do we change this?
How do we make it better? You know,
I see.
How do we modify to try to enhance? That's the whole biomedical engiering mentality. And
always moving forward.
Yeah, trying to make things better. But you know, from my perspective, biology is so cool, so perfect in itself. I want to understand it better to help enhance our lives. So you know, I was more thinking of reverse engineering the way things work to better understand and draw a wider application. And, you know, they were doing, a lot of it was biomaterials, where they were trying to make, you know, synthetic materials to incorporate into the body, which is, I think is great, but I'm looking at how does the skin heal itself, and how do we help that? That's where my mind was.
Sure.
And I didn't realize that, this isn't bioengineering. This is more kind of health, right? This is, you're focused on health. And I got into genetics, and I was, people either went into prosthesis.
You must be smart.
Well, in biomedical engineering.
I mean, biomedical engineering. Yes.
I did good in school.
Physics.
I did well in school.
Yeah.
My teachers never thought I was fully motivated in my potential. But school came rather easily to me, so I was able to focus on the things I was interested in.
Yeah.
And, in biomedical engineering undergraduates, there's the prosthesis arm, there's the biomaterials, there's the robotics, and then, genetics was just kind of starting off. It wasn't as popular, but that, to me, that was the most biology heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, I'm going to get into this computational biology, doing gene sequence analysis and
Computational?
Yeah, you're using computers to look at the gene sequences. And so you're using computer programs to go through these, millions or billions of genetic code, trying to find patterns, identify areas within these genes that might be significant. And then you go and do your biology experiments to see if they are. And so I did that through junior and senior year of my undergraduate. I did a master's program in medical sciences because when I finished my undergraduate, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. At that point, you can go work for a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company. That's what most people do in bioengineering. And it still didn't feel right to me. It wasn't.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and it is.
I mean, to really follow your passion or you follow your heart, so to say, that you go, this is still not it. This is not what I'm going to dive in and really love what I do for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say I was guided by that consciously, but I still, looking back on it now, I realize I'm glad I didn't. So I went in. I did a master's in medical sciences, and that's a lot of people in the pre-med world call it a post-bac. So post-bac is a master's program or a postgraduate program where you go and do a lot more of the pre-med courses. So if you haven't had pre-med, you do the pre-med courses again. And basically it's a primer for medical school. So most of the people in that master's program were really trying to get into medical school. Okay, so I did all the pre-med requirements in my undergraduate, but I was an engineer versus a pre-med, so my grades were a lot lower. Engineering tests are all open answers, and you're working out, so you can't get 100 or 99 on them. You're usually getting in the 90s. So 3.2 is a good GPA for an engineer. 3.8 is a pre-med GPA. Yeah. So you're trying to compete with these. So anyway, so I did a post-bac program, and I was surrounded for that year by all the pre-meds who weren't good enough to get into medical school. So it was actually, even worse for me to see all these people and say, these are really not the people I want to be around. They're really cutthroat, and the motivations weren't there. Didn't seem like they were interested in the way that I was in health and healing. So at that point I said, I'm not going to medical school. Forget this. And so this is a year after college. And I went back, I connected, I was doing this genetic research this whole time. And I, was talking to, he was an MD, PhD, and I talked to him and I said, I don't know if medical school's right for me right now. He said, well, come back and keep doing medical research with me. You can keep doing the biology research. And he moved to Nashville at the time. And so he said, you're welcome to come down, move to Nashville and spend some more time working on the same projects and maybe some new projects. So I did that. So I moved to Nashville. And the research I was doing at the time was cardiology research. So he's a cardiologist, and I was working in a molecular cardiology lab. So we were looking at rat heart cells. We get the cells, put them on a petri dish, and you do various things to these cells to try to figure out how they work. Okay. So what I was tasked to do, or what I was believed I was doing, was these heart cells never stop beating. Our heart cells too. Yeah. Rat cells, whatever. Any heart cells, they're constantly beating. And so we were saying the question we posed was, how do the proteins inside these cells turn over, repair, in a beating heart? It's not like it stops. It can rest for an hour, and the proteins come in and turn over. So we're trying to look at some of the genetic mechanisms that allow for these proteins to turn over. Basically, where on the genes are there little motifs or little sequences where the body can target and say, this is where you need to come and make a new protein, and this is the code for that new protein, go. So did lots of sequence analysis looking for these different proteins and how they might be cued to be made, go into the cell.
Yeah.
And I did it junior year, senior year, into my master's. So
No
basically
way.
3 or 4 years I was doing this sort of work. And we get to, probably 3 years in, 3.5 years in, and I meet with my research advisor, and he said, we're trying to write this grant. We need more funding. We're trying to get this big grant with the NIH. Mm-hmm. We really need to make this research look a little bit more sexy. And I said, what? We're just trying to figure out, how these proteins
we're doing good work.
We're trying to see how things work. He says, well, it needs to look like it can be made into a therapeutic.
Yeah, if you want to make money with this, get the money, they need to see something that excites them.
Yeah, and what excites them is something that could be made into a therapeutic, a drug.
I see.
Some sort of thing that and that moment, I was at that time I was just a research assistant. I wasn't a student anymore. I was just working, full time in the research lab, doing some other stuff personally, yoga, skateboarding, rock climbing, just trying to find myself. But I had the time, the energy, the mentality, and not the stress of school, where when he said that, I said, wait, what? Yeah. And so it became obvious to me right away in that instant, okay, where's the funding coming from? We're applying to NIH for these grants, but the money is coming from someone who wants this research to look like it's turning into a therapeutic. So, follow the money. Right away, it's obvious it's coming from pharmaceuticals, and it's coming from interests of pharmaceuticals and biotech and things like that. So, and so that was a turning point for me. And I said, okay, I don't know if this feels right to me anymore. It felt right on, I love doing the pipetting and the centrifuging and all the gel electrophoresis. That was all fun for me.
That's fun.
Yeah, I like using my hands. I like setting up experiments, watching them run. But then looking down the road, and my research advisor, he was just writing grants all the time. He wasn't even doing the experiments. He was just at his computer. And I said, is this what I want for my life? No. Yeah. Concurrently, or exactly at the same time, my roommate, who was also an MD PhD student, he was doing same lab, but he was doing some other experiments. We used to skateboard together. We used to rock climb together. Yeah. He was a few years ahead of me, and he was a good friend and motivator. And we were out skateboarding one night in a parking lot, and he broke his collarbone. Oh. Okay, so he just fell. And I looked up, and he was holding his arm like this, and he says, I think I broke my collarbone. I said, yeah, you could see it, He said, take me to the ER. I said, okay. So I drove him to the ER, went home. He was also my rock climbing buddy, so we'd go to the rock climbing gym, and at that time, there weren't they didn't have those auto belays that they have here at Spire, but you always had to have someone. So immediately I lost my skateboarding buddy and my belay. And it was for him, it was his right arm, his dominant arm, and I saw the depression kind of because he was 6 weeks in a sling, and then months after that he was not able to do the things he wanted to do. But that's a different story. I had this membership to the rock climbing gym, and no one to follow me on the route, so I started bouldering a little bit, which you can do by yourself. But they had yoga classes, free yoga classes for members.
For the members, yeah.
I said, okay, well, let's start doing yoga. Okay. So I went to one class. I was like, this feels really good. Okay, there's something about it. And I really kind of got hooked on yoga right away. So I started doing yoga, pretty much every day or 3 times a week at the climbing gym. And climbing yoga is different to me. It's, it's a lot of strong people who need the flexibility. So those yoga classes are actually really fun because there's a lot of strength in the classes. You're doing arm balances. You're doing all these fun things.
So it was really adjusted
for the climbers, yeah. And then I, in future years, I taught in the same way because it's interesting, it's fun.
Yeah.
So I started doing yoga at the climbing gym, and then the studio that put on those classes, the owner came in and subbed a few times, and I really liked him. We started talking. He said, we're doing a teacher training. You should think about coming. I said, oh, okay. Well, I'm not really doing much else. So, yeah. And it was a year-long teacher training where you do once a month. They had week-long retreats at the beginning and the end, and then it was like 1 or 2 weekends every month.
Yeah.
drawn out. And that was really a life-changing, experience for me, because I started to see this health. I started to feel in my body what health was, what interacting with health was. And then through yoga and the yogic kind of framework, I started learning how they've made it into a science for thousands of years in India.
I see.
And at that point, I said, okay, this feels more like health than any of the medicine, any of the biomedical engineering I've done, biology, yeah, but it wasn't in practice. So the yoga was what really kind of got me feeling like something was right here.
In a way, biology is trying to explain with newer technology what many people have practiced for thousands of years.
Absolutely.
That worked. Now science is trying to understand it. Why does it work?
Yeah.
Right? And then, so I think that it is super interesting.
Yeah.
But what I see indeed with modern medicine is that they say, okay, we'll take it from here.
Yep.
And I go, you cannot really just take it from here, because we're very complex.
Yeah.
I mean, once you have figured out all the joints and the spine and the nervous system, and then you start talking about the brain, which is a big pusher for so much what's going on. I always say the section above the neck is your coach, talks to you 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
There is a lot going on in here that can make changes in an instant. And all of a sudden we're moving in a whole different direction in life before you know it. So I see your point that this taught you, wow, it got you more in tune with how it used to be.
Yeah. And, like you said, the science and the medicine, the modern kind of technologies, they'll take a little bit. Okay, we understand this much. How do we make it better? They right away go with it and try to make things better.
Yeah.
And what I was understanding through yoga is, okay, you can keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And even if we don't have a word in science or biology to explain this, these phenomena are there. And so do we need to explain and understand everything in a scientific framework? It's helpful, it's beneficial, but the true framework actually goes a lot larger. And this is when people talk about Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and osteopathy too, there's a large component that's trying to put these practices into the scientific boxes, when in fact these practices are so much larger than science. So you can't fit acupuncture fully into a scientific. So, you're looking at these acupuncture meridians. Oh, do they line up with the nerves? You're missing the point. They might a little bit, but there's a whole larger system that isn't going to fit in there yet. Maybe someday it will. Hopefully someday it will somewhat. But that's the problem with science and medicine, because we get so short-sighted. We put the blinders on. Yeah. So when I started learning about Ayurveda and yoga, it really kind of opened up my.
So where did you learn about the Ayurveda?
This was
because
all
of the yoga.
This was all in Nashville.
So it was all about in the climbing gym, the yoga lessons,
after
the teacher.
The climbing gym, that was the start of it.
Sure.
And then I started moving into the studio. There was one studio called Sanctuary for Yoga that was in Nashville, Tennessee, and they contracted the classes at the climbing gym.
Okay.
So eventually I said, okay, I'm done climbing. My climbing buddy's not climbing anymore, and I've got this new passion of yoga. So I said, I probably kept the membership, but I started going to the studio. And then I got the teacher training going. So this is all going on at Sanctuary for Yoga, which is the teacher training, or this yoga studio there in Nashville. And one of the weekends was intensive on Ayurveda. So they had this guy come in. He was an Indian guy from LA, I think. And we probably got 10 hours on a Saturday, 10 hours on a Sunday, and Friday night we did a few hours, probably 20 25 hours.
Yeah, wow.
And he really broke down, Vedic, the Vedas and the Vedic philosophy, and how that kind of translated into Ayurveda, the basics of it, the doshas, the body types, the elements, some of the treatments a little bit. And then we did this, what he called I think it was called a sweha, but it's a yoga practice where you first do a self-oil massage. You get your body medicated with medicated oils, you apply it, and then the room wasn't heated, but you do a strong yoga practice to heat up the body. So you're heating from the inside, so the oil can come in deep into the joints, into the muscles. Okay. And so, we kind of experimented with some of the practices and definitely a lot of the theory in Ayurveda. So that really kind of got me sparked on health more. And this is all in a time when I'm still trying to figure out what am I going to do with my life, right? So I never thought yoga was going to be a profession for me. It wasn't, didn't seem sustainable for me. You know, I've always, it was good for myself to do, but it just didn't feel like the right thing.
Right.
But once I started learning about Ayurveda, I said, okay, you know, this seems a little bit more my style. This might be something I could do. Maybe. Let's see. Right about that time, let's say, I went to India.
Yourself?
Myself.
So I mean, you went to India, you wanted to see what that country was all about and the traditions.
Yeah, well, you know, my parents were from India.
Okay.
They immigrated to the U.S. in the 70s. So we would go back, you know, when I was a kid, we'd go back every few years. Got less and less and less, but we would go to see family, which was great.
And you speak the language?
A little bit. I spoke more.
I'm sure there was different dialects.
I spoke
over there.
more when I was a kid, and then as we got older, and you know, my grandparents passed away and things, less and less and less, but a little bit. But I had family there. But you know, yoga was never a part of my childhood. The Hindu religion, little bit, but you know, when I started learning about yoga, and that brought me back to a lot of the Hindu concepts that were there in my childhood, but not really focused on much.
Right.
But at this point, when I learned yoga, I was a yoga teacher. I said, let's go back to India and get the experience of yoga from India.
Yeah.
Okay. So I spent a month at a yoga studio. They call it the Yoga Mandiram, Krishnamacharya Mandiram in Chennai. Mandiram. It's just like an ashram, basically. Okay. It's a place where they teach yoga. In Chennai. So I spent a month there it was a course for internationals, but we learned about more of the traditional yoga, and they got into, you know, a lot more than just the physical postures. Yeah. You know, oil treatments like that, breathing, pranayama, meditation, all that stuff. And then after that, I went and spent 2 weeks with an Ayurvedic practitioner at an Ayurvedic hospital in Kerala. And I stayed on site there for 2 weeks and got a few treatments myself. I was healthy, so I didn't need much treatment. But, you know, daily oil massages, Ayurvedic food every day. They gave us the teas. They gave me the herbs, all that stuff. And lots of time to just sit and meditate and rest. I saw patients coming in with spinal cord injuries. They were doing treatments on them. Came in wheelchairs. A few weeks later, they're on crutches. A few weeks later, they're on canes. Wow. Okay, there's something to this.
Yeah.
But the most important thing, I had a meeting there was one doctor I was with the whole time, and then he took me to one of his superiors, and we had a chat for a few hours. And he said, oh, okay, so you're from the West, you're in America. I said, yeah. He said, okay, and you're interested, you know, you're interested in yoga, you're interested in Ayurveda. I said, yeah, you know, this is really interesting to me, and I think this is something I could learn and do. He said, okay, well, I'm going to give you 2 pieces of advice. And these 2 pieces of advice, one of those, again, worldview shifters. He said, if you're going to live and work in the West, in the healthcare fields, you should have a Western medical degree. That's just his opinion. He said you can go to medical school, whatever, but it will benefit you in the West to be licensed as a Westerner. I said, okay, that's interesting. Yeah. After that, you can come or be there, learn the Ayurvedic science with a Western degree, and you can practice, you know, you can use the science. The Ayurvedic science it's a beautiful structure. It's not a pharmaceutical, you know, this symptom, this medication. Right. You learn about the concepts. You can apply them anywhere. Right. I said, okay. And then he said, once you do that, don't come back to India and import our herbs. That's not going to work. Import our herbs? So if you don't come back to India, learn what you need to do, then go back to the West and introduce the herbs. Well, no. He said, if you're practicing in the West, don't bring herbs from India to treat your patients in the West. Interesting. What you need to do is learn about herbalism where you are. In America. So Native Americans, herbalists, traditional, you know, whatever grows around you, you apply the Ayurvedic science to the herbs as well as to the patients, and everything's there. If you're trying to bring, you know, there are a few herbs that grow in India that are great, and there's a few things like ashwagandha and tulsi and things that are good. But if you're trying to import all your therapeutics from elsewhere, you're missing the point. So those two concepts of, get a Western degree and then look at what grows around you, and
Correct.
then, use Ayurveda as a science, not as a practice per se.
Right.
So those two
It's
things.
interesting because I heard once that a Native American medicine man, or at least one of them, has said that usually when you get hurt or injured or sick, there is an answer
Right there.
within a 100-yard
Yeah.
radius.
Yeah.
And so that is interesting.
Yeah.
They say Mother Nature provides you with all you need in a very small area. So
Absolutely. And if you get, any sort of traditional herbalism, even, Western herbalism that's focused on your locale, it's like the dandelions grow, the rosemary, when you're in California, rosemary was growing everywhere. It's great for your adrenal glands. So yeah, the answers are there if you're just looking for them. So again, the medicine and the science, we get so caught up in what's this compound and how is it working,
yeah,
and we kind of miss the great bigger picture of, what you need is right there.
right.
So
Right.
that's what really kind of got me on, starting to get in the path. Now, rewind back probably just a few months before, I was at the end of my yoga training in Nashville at the studio, and still trying to figure out, do I want to do Ayurveda? I was teaching yoga at the time. What am I doing here?
Yeah.
And a woman came in, a patron of the studio, and after the class, she went to my mentor and she said, she spoke in an accent. She said, I'm looking for an osteopath in
wow.
Nashville. Does Nashville have any osteopaths?
No way.
And she was either French or German. She was European of some sort.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? What is that?
You hear Nashville,
What is
you're
that?
like,
Or
what?
Nashville. And I said, I've heard the word osteopath before, but it kind of went over. In high school, I probably heard it from someone. But I said, okay, this woman is looking for a specific type of person, and she can't find it here in Nashville. So what is it, and why is, So I go and talk to my MD, PhD research advisor. I said, well, what's an osteopath? And, he said, oh yeah, it's just another good way to go to medical school. I have a few mentees that have gone the DO route, and it's interesting. You learn some cool stuff, and in the end, you're just a doctor. Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then I spoke to, I looked it up. Probably did what you did, looked up AT Still, looked up the tenets of osteopathy, and get into the structure and function and the body.
You probably have to say the name because that went really fast.
Yeah.
A.T. Still. There's Andrew
Taylor
Still
We
was
call
a
him-
medical doctor in Missouri.
Yep, we call him AT Still. He was
A.T.
the
Still.
founder of osteopathy.
Yeah. 1874.
Yep, that's
what I read.
Yep, that's when he flung the banner of osteopathy, which basically says he kind of said it was a thing and decided he wanted to start teaching it. 1894 is when he opened the first school.
Yeah.
But all this was basically it was all new to me. As soon as that woman said osteopathy, I said that, I went down this rabbit hole of this is a completely new thing. And most of my patients, when they hear about me and osteopathy, is the same thing. It's like, what is this? How have I never heard about this?
Right.
And the 4 tenets of osteopathy that really, sparked it for me. The first one is the body, mind, and spirit are interconnected. Each patient is a dynamic unit of function of all 3 of those. So you can treat just the body, you can treat just the mind, you can treat just the spirit, but you're missing the point if you do any of that.
I see.
It's all one, and they're inseparable.
Yeah.
And in medical school, it's so scientific these days. A lot of the students say, "Oh, that sounds religious to me," and that's some whatever. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable. The beauty of osteopathy is you can be religious and understand it and have a belief in God, and osteopathy is a great understanding. But you can be completely atheist and have no belief in God.
Yeah.
The concept of osteopathy always ties back to anatomy and physiology.
What?
To anatomy and physiology.
Oh, yes.
So, but then what's this body, mind, and spirit, right? So what I tell my patients, and I make no assumptions when a patient comes in, whether they have spiritual practice or not. I usually ask them because I think it's beneficial to have a spiritual practice.
Sure.
But I say, when Andrew Taylor Still said body, mind, and spirit, the body is our physical body, muscles, bones, organs, these things that we have names for.
Yeah, you bet.
The mind and the brain is body, as far as I'm concerned. Mind is how the brain interacts with the body, the control mechanisms of the brain through the nervous system on the physical soma. And the interesting thing is that most people realize is when you have a mind or a brain controlling the body, these phenomena start to come up that you can't say is just the body or just the mind.
I see.
It's the interaction of the two.
Mm-hmm.
And so then looking at that model, then you say, okay, well, when you have a mind controlling a body, even more phenomenon come out that you can't, and that's the spirit. So what makes you have a thought to move your arm? Okay, where does that spark, that electrical spark that starts in your brain and goes to your arm, where does it start?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some people say, oh, it's random chance or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's fine. If that's what you want to call spirit, that's spirit. It's just these extraneous phenomenon that arise when you have a mind and a body. That's spirit.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to call it God, that's great, but you can call it whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty of osteopathy, is that it's so broad with this concept of body, mind, and spirit that it applies to everybody.
Yeah.
So that's the first tenet. The second tenet is that structure and function are interrelated. So a lot of people have heard the concept that form follows function.
Correct.
Okay?
Yeah.
So you have a function, the form is made for that function, which is true. What osteopathy says is you can change either one, and the other one gets changed.
Correct.
So you sprain your ankle, you're not going to be able to walk on it. That's obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, if you just start walking on your leg funny, you start limping,
You bet.
your muscles are going to atrophy.
Yeah.
The joints might ankylose. Things are going to change. The anatomy itself is going to change.
Yeah.
So using that reciprocal integration is what we have determined we can use our hands now to affect function of the body through the form and affect form through the function. The third tenet is that
I want to jump real
Yeah.
quick on the form function.
Sure.
I learned about that many years ago when I had my radio show, and there was somebody on, and I knew him, and I would see him at the gym, and he would be on the treadmill doing some work, and he's pretty strong, muscular. He had a booty on him, but I knew he was very, very fit, and he. One of the things he did, he would do research, taking people up in the mountains and then cook for them and watch how the food would affect them climbing up in certain higher elevations, etc. That was one thing he did. He loved to ski, and he was a big telemark skier. And so now I hadn't seen him for a while, and all of a sudden I ran into him, and he looked really skinny. And I thought that he was sick.
Oh, no.
I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I feel great." I said, "Man, you sure have changed."
Yeah.
I said, "You used to be like strong and a booty and big legs, and now you're skinny legs." And he said, "Oh," he said, "I used to do a lot of telemark skiing, and that is really, you're turning a certain way. You need a lot of
leg
butt
strength.
and muscle and lower back." He said, "But I really got into marathon running."
Okay.
And so now you can't carry all that weight around.
Yeah.
And he was really skinny.
Yeah.
And so he said, Jacobus, function changes form, and form and function. And that's when I thought about it. Wow, that's so interesting how that works. Yeah. So thanks for bringing that up.
It's a simple concept, and that's the thing with osteopathy. There's lots of simple concepts that just really they apply, almost universally. And that tenet right there, form and function, and the reciprocal integration of them. When patients come in, they don't know what an osteopath is. Most people assume, oh, you work on the muscles, you work on the joints,
right? Neuromuscular something.
Fix my back, and we do, absolutely.
Sure.
But there's something very different about what we do compared to what the chiropractors do, and we'll get into that a little bit. But my belief, and it's when I'm working on someone, yes, I'm thinking about the structure, but we're really focusing on the function. We're trying to get this patient's body to a better state of function, a more optimal state of function for who they are at the moment in this time with all the stress and all the trauma they've been through. We're trying to optimize their function. So I'm not thinking about a joint specifically or a muscle specifically that's tight or a knee. I'm saying, okay, how is this whole leg working as they're walking or as they're sitting? How is the nervous system working in function, and how can we interact with that function to make it better? Yeah. So that's the second tenet of osteopathy. third and fourth tenets are pretty straightforward. And third tenet is that the body has the innate ability to heal.
Yeah,
So
I
the
agree.
body has everything it needs to heal.
Yeah,
The problem is usually it just gets stuck. People say, well, if the body has the ability to heal, why am I here to see you? Well,
right.
the body has defense mechanisms, and trauma tends to get things to a state of protection rather than a state of healing. And we'll get into that as well. And then the fourth tenet is just really a summation of all the other three, which says rational treatment of any patient requires the physician to take into account all three of those previous tenets.
I see.
So you can't just say, okay, the body has the ability to heal, get out of here.
Right.
You can't just say
Right.
structure
Right.
and function are interrelated. Let me manipulate your knee and you're all better.
Uh-huh.
And you can't just say, okay, you need some spiritual healing and that's it. You need to do all three of those things. You need to allow the body to be working as optimally as it can in the moment with, physical manipulation, with nutrition, with exercise, with stress relief. You need to take into account the patient's body, their mind, and their spirit, see where we can help activate these healing forces. And you need to really support that body's ability to heal. And if you do all three of those things, that's a rational treatment. If you
Yeah.
miss any of those three things, it's irrational. And
Right.
that's where most medical and even a lot of alternative treatments fall short, is you're so focused on one thing or the other that you're not taking holistic approach is a big keyword. It's always been, but there's always more we can look at.
So it is interesting then that when people would approach you, they need to understand what they're going to get themselves into, right? Because you can help somebody very quickly, but at the same time, you hope that the person he or she is interested in understanding how important it is to heal the whole body, mind, and spirit. And so it is going to be you kind of make a choice and say, I'm going to step on this path, and I'm going to walk a path of paying attention to all the different aspects of my life, right?
The beauty of osteopathy is that it can happen consciously, and that's great.
Sure.
If someone is ready to say, okay, I'm going to wake up and I'm
Yeah.
going to pay more attention, yeah, it's going to happen a lot faster. But by our entry point as osteopaths into the patient is the physical body. We use our fingers to feel the muscles and the bones and the rhythms of the body, the blood flow, the spinal fluid, all that thing. I can access that in someone who's completely asleep, literally.
Yeah.
Or someone who's in a state of confusion or whatever, mentally asleep, whatever you can say. They always have a body. They always have a physical soma. So we have an entry point for pretty much anyone. So you don't need to necessarily even believe in osteopathy for it to work. A lot of people say, "Oh, do I need to believe this works?" No, it doesn't matter. I'm moving tissues. I'm helping blood flow. I'm helping neurologic function. People start to feel it. And so you're always just moving people to a more greater state of function.
Yeah.
Are they going to see that, they need to focus on their stress, they need to have, better relationships in their life, they need some spiritual practice? Is that going to happen the day after my first treatment? Maybe, but no. It might happen months later, it might happen years later, it might happen lifetimes later as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
It's just getting them on the right path.
Right.
And that's, again, the beauty of osteopathy is we have this physical way to get in.
I see.
So it can start that path for pretty much anyone, and it doesn't have to be the same path. That's the other beauty. Like I said, it's not religious. If someone this physical manipulation is going to get this person's physical body, and more importantly, their nervous system, to a better state of balance, better state of function. So now they have the energy, subconsciously, really, to start letting these things in.
Yeah.
And finding what does spirituality mean to them. Does it mean exploring this religion and this pathway? Does it mean meditating? Does it mean looking into science and probability? It doesn't really matter, as long as they're looking into something of what makes them tick.
Yeah.
That's spirit. So yeah, they don't need to make all these huge life changes and these huge perspective changes. We're going to get their body feeling better. We're going to get their nervous system feeling better. And then what's going to happen is going to happen. And that's not up to me.
No.
It's not even up to them. That's, that to me is the health. We call it the health
Right.
with a capital H. It's spirit. It's
Yeah, because by the time they walk into your door, they've had their own history.
Yeah.
They have been raised by parents who brought their own
Sure.
habits and everything in it. And so you carry that on through the decades.
Yeah.
And so to all of a sudden make a quick shift could may be tough.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think that is the special. I think that is so interesting about your work that there is nobody is the same, not even twins,
No.
and they all come in with their own destiny and their own path and their own emotions, etc. And that you are noticing when you work with the body.
Yeah. And one of my greatest teachers, Jim Jealous, he said, even the same patient isn't the same. You know, they come back, every time they come back, different patient.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, they've had some of the same traumas, but every time you treat them, they're a new person. And as constant transformation, transmutation is what he says. You know, they think the forces come in, the forces go out. These traumas, these stresses, these strains, they come into the body, they transmutate something, and we're trying to get them to transmutate for the positive.
I see. Now, there are doctors in this town who are osteopath, and many of them work in a family practice with other medical doctors.
Sure.
And I did once an interview with one of them, and he said, it's so difficult for me to even work with the osteopathy because the insurance companies, they only give you 10 minutes to work with a patient. So it's very difficult for me to do what I do, but yes, I'm a DO.
Yeah.
Now, what is the difference between the osteopathy, the general osteopathy, and the traditional osteopathy? I mean, in a way, you already said what traditional is, but maybe you can recap it.
Sure. So, you know, the Andrew Taylor Still, A.T. Still, the founder, he was an MD in the Civil War era, medically licensed surgeon. He believed that, you know, the medicine of the time was not healing people as well as it could. It was a little barbaric. There's cut, burn, poison. You know, and he lost a wife and 3 kids to spinal meningitis.
Oh wow!
And he went into this dark depression, and then he came out on the other side with osteopathy. And what osteopathic physicians are now, it's a dual pathway. So you can either do 4 years of MD medical school and get an MD, or you do 4 years of DO, osteopathic medical school, and you get a DO degree.
Okay.
They have separate boards that are actually combining now, but as a DO, you could take the MD boards if you wanted to, or you could take the DO boards. It doesn't really matter. Once you pass your boards, you get a full unrestricted medical license.
Okay.
In Montana, there's one medical licensing board, the Montana Medical Licensing Board. Whether you're an MD or a DO, you apply to that licensing board. They give you the same medical license. It doesn't matter. California, they have 2 different boards. There's a big history in California that we can get into in another show. But when you graduate from medical school, you have an unrestricted license. You end up going on to do a residency, internship, residency, fellowship. They're parallel pathways. You can go into any specialty you'd like to.
After that,
There's DOs in plastic surgery, radiology, orthopedic surgery, dermatology, family medicine, pediatrics. Every specialty has DOs and MDs. And pretty much they always work side by side, especially when they're employed by a hospital system. So if you go to the ER, you probably see a DO. You go to the hospital, inpatient, you probably see DOs. You don't even know it. You don't.
So you do your pre-med, and then you do 4 years of medical school or 4 years of osteopathy, and then after those 4 years, then you can specialize even more.
You do a residency to get your specialty, and that's usually anywhere between 3 years and 5 years or 8 years if you're going to do thoracic surgery. That's 8 years. So, but even those residencies, it's often DOs and MDs side by side doing their training, and those pathways are actually merging more and more as the years go on. It's one single pathway after training. So what happens is, even at the beginning of medical school, a large percent of osteopathic medical students go to osteopathic school just because they want to be a regular doctor. They want to be a dermatologist or a radiologist or a surgeon. So they go to DO school just because the location, or maybe they got into one where they wanted to go and for whatever reason. So and then by the time you get into, fully licensed doctors, probably over 90% of DOs with DO degrees go on to practice regular medicine.
Yeah.
It's probably, I used to say 7% maybe of DOs do traditional osteopathy. It's probably less now. And once you get out of medical school, you get out of residency, you have all this debt, you have a family, the easiest thing to do is go get a job, right? Someone's going to pay you a salary, give you benefits, and then you do, you do your thing. So again, more and more physicians are employed physicians. This shift happened when I was in medical school. There used to be mostly private practice doctors, and then they shifted to mostly employed doctors, and that's when healthcare administration became a thing. And now, that we can talk about that as well.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic.
But that has really changed physicians and how they can work, because now most physicians are employed by a hospital system or employed by an employer. So the employer says, okay, well, we need to make these physicians make as much money as we can. So they're telling you how much time you have.
It becomes a business.
It becomes a business. So insurance companies do reimburse for osteopathy. I charge an office visit and osteopathic manipulation. I spend an hour with my patients. They reimburse. Medicare reimburses it. But you need to set it up differently than a large-scale, hospital system would. The hospital systems are used to just, seeing patients every 10 minutes. You're not going to have time to do any manipulation there, or very little. So it has to be set up differently, and that's where it takes someone who's in private practice to say, okay, this is what my patients need. This is how I'm going to set it up.
Yeah.
So that's really the difference between a traditional osteopath and a DO medical doctors, and there's nothing wrong with that. And most DOs, that you get a lot of the basic osteopathic philosophy, you get some of the basic manipulation in medical school, but after the first 2 years, most DOs just don't think about that. They're so focused on medicine, which there's so much to learn with medicine, that they kind of let that go by the wayside. So small percentage of us become traditional osteopaths, and then people say, okay, well, you're a chiropractor. Well, yeah. We're medically licensed, so unlike chiropractors who don't have full medical licenses, we are physicians. And our approach, rather than putting things back into place, that concept of putting things back into place says, okay, well, there's something wrong with you. We believe anytime a patient comes in, they're exactly where they need to be for whatever reason.
I see.
Car accident, sports injury, the trauma protected them, okay? It got them to a state where they didn't break anything more or die.
Right.
But the nervous system isn't so good at saying, okay, that trauma's in the past. That was last week, that was last year, that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
The nervous system never really reassesses that. So what we do is we come on and we say, okay, you're here for a reason, trauma, toxicity, whatever. Is this serving you right now, or is this serving you in the past? And always the body says, okay, this isn't serving me right now as best as it could. So we, as a relationship between the physician and the patient, we find a better place for that patient's body to be. So we check different ways. We say, okay, this joint is stuck in this direction. It's open in this direction. Can we balance everything around to get better blood flow, better neurologic tone, better lymphatic movement? And it's always directed by the patient. It's not me saying, this is out of place, I'm going to put it back. It's saying, this feels a little bit stuck. This feels a little stagnant. This feels a little congested. Let's see where it goes. Do it go this way? No, go this way. Okay, if I take you this way, I put in a little compression, I feel everything get soft. I feel all that blood come in. This is where the patient wants to go. So we go that way.
Yeah.
So it's always just helping the body do what it needs to do, what it can do, rather than trying to force anything upon it.
Right.
So.
Wow. Fascinating. I would like you to come back and talk again.
Sure.
I want to, this is a super interesting story to give us a glimpse in what went through your mind and how you followed this path into what you do, and what actually gives you the opportunity to really do anything you want to do with the body and the mind and the spirit in this case. So I can understand that you're totally passionate about this, because it feels very natural to you, but you had to go through all these stages in order to get there, and you have to meet the right people. And as you're saying, it's never the wrong time. There's no, in that aspect, there's no coincidence, right? These things happen in the right timing. So that's fascinating. I'd like you to come back and talk more about how you actually treat patients in certain things. And you and I have talked in private, and you have already given me some glimpses about detoxing and IV treatments and stuff of that nature. So I would like you to come back. I really appreciate that. Thank you for doing this today.
For sure.
Thank you.
Great.
Folks, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I hope you learned something. It is a personal story, and there are several guests who I like to have a personal story with, because if you watch the whole thing, you get an idea, wow, this is interesting how this goes and how it starts and where it is right now. And that sometimes explains more about why certain treatments work and why they don't work, because of the person behind the actual treatment, the person behind the medicine, the person behind the philosophy of medicine. So I hope you come back and watch another show with Dr. Sunil Bhat. And thank you very much for listening today, and have a wonderful day.
Visit healthinfocusnow.com.